30 minutes later, another car pulls up. Anybody hungry? This is not good for weight control. So I raise it, sure. And so she gives me, a man and woman, gives me a big Tupperware container of the most amazing homemade stew with a roll, with cupcakes for dessert, a bottle of water, and asks me if I want a blanket. I mean, this is just nonstop. And so I think these people are really well-meaning, but at the end of the day, what they're doing is enabling some very destructive behavior, I think, for these young people.
Sometimes I actually take a vacation, and even on those vacations, I sometimes stay home. Got a nice bed and a TV, and it works well. What kind of guy spends his paid vacation sleeping out on the streets? Well, the mayor of Aurora does. Mike Coffman, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, I love all the attention this has gotten. That somehow you're a bad guy because you spent a week trying to learn what is really going on with the transients in the Denver metro area, which affects, of course, Aurora. One, the reaction is crazy, and I don't think it's because of what you did, because I remember Democrats doing this all the time years ago. It's what you said you found.
Right.
Were you surprised by the reaction first?
Yeah, I really was surprised. I think that, but afterwards I understood why the reaction was so swift, was so condemning, in that my observations didn't comport with the narrative that these so-called advocates for the homeless, particularly in these encampments in Denver, were putting forward. And so I think if they had comported, then it would have been such a brave thing that I did. They probably would have been erecting a statue on my behalf. Then I would have been an absolute hero. But the fact that it kind of shook them at their core in terms of the image that they're trying to project versus the image that I projected.
If I were to put it on a bumper sticker, tell me how far off I am. What they hated of what you said is that you said, no, this is largely a lifestyle decision more so than anything else. Yeah. Is that what you found?
For these larger encampments that were younger people that sort of had a vibe to them that reminded me of late 60s, early 70s with the hippie movement, that it was about kind of dropping out of society. There was a drug culture element to it, but in the hippie culture, it was marijuana and hallucinogenic drugs, and here it was predominantly crystal methamphetamine as sort of the common denominator for these encampments.
And we're all wondering, how did you enjoy that? Were the drugs good?
You know, the good thing about it is they don't. That's one thing they don't share because it's a pretty competitive environment every day to get high. So they didn't share in those drugs.
Well, if you want some, I know Copel's probably got some here someplace.
But it was, so what was so odd about that was that, during the course of the week, I stayed in one shelter in Aurora, 2 different shelters in Denver, and then in an encampment in Denver. But observed in encampments, probably spent most of my time in the area of 22nd and Stout, 11th and Tacoma, Broadway, Spear, and Lincoln.
When you said encampments and shelters, it seems like,
right.
I mean, I get it. There are people living in tents or on the sidewalk, and there are people who can go to the shelter at night. Right. And I kind of thought that those groups were pretty much the same. You found that they were really kind of 2 different groups with 2 different lifestyles? Is that the right way to put it?
Completely mutually exclusive. And let me say, I really carefully utilized all my time during this week to talk to as many people as I could to understand their situation. And so I was in the shelter before I was in an encampment, and so I was asking all the people in the shelter, the homeless people there, people experiencing homeless that were there, tell me what might be a good encampment to go to. And they would give me a blank stare because none of them had ever stayed in an encampment. And then in the encampments, in talking to people, none of them had stayed in a shelter. And so these advocates would have us believe that the reason why the people in these encampments don't go to the shelters is because that they're not safe. They don't believe that they're safe. They believe that there are health risks in terms of being in a pandemic with COVID. And they believe that they might get their few possessions stolen at the shelters. And none of that was really true. The shelters, you had to wear a mask at all times in the shelters. They were always reminded about social distancing. I never had anything stolen in the shelter, and I always felt safe in the shelter. Never really felt safe in the encampments.
Talk to me about the drug use, though. So was there a lot of drug use in the shelters as well?
There was some, even though they have rules to prohibit it. I did see some, but mostly what I saw was in the immediate environs outside the shelter. People using drugs. I think probably it was more alcohol than drugs. I think for the shelter population, chronic homeless that were older, that had substance abuse issues.
Were older people in the shelter more than in the encampments?
Encampments were young, very young people, mostly in their 20s. I would say in the encampments.
So these are people who are capable of having a job. I would assume they're physically able, except that they're addicted to drugs. Talk to me about the mental illness, because this is the other thing I keep hearing, which is there's a lot of mental illness, and that's what you're seeing here. So you might say it's a lifestyle choice. No, they don't have a choice. It's mental illness.
Well, I think I certainly did see mental illness in the shelters. Unfortunately, not a large group of people, but people that were clearly mentally ill. That you could be seen talking to themselves, not interacting with others, or waving their hands uncontrollably. A lot of behaviors that they clearly where they were not capable of taking care of themselves, but just knew enough to navigate the shelter to get food and a place to sleep. But my experience in the encampments are that the mentally ill, the people that are truly mentally ill, do not like to be in that a group setting that's pretty congested with people living in close quarters in these encampments. They tend to like to be out on their own, sad life, and I think we have an obligation to help those that suffer from mental illness.
You told me before, and this one really got me. I was like, well, where do you eat? I'm assuming you're in a soup line someplace, or you go to the shelter to get food, or so where did you get your food?
I ate better in the encampments than I did in the shelter, and so I remember.
Stop there. I want to say this again because this is what blew my mind. So there's the shelter, the rescue mission. They do great work, and bless them for doing it. And they'll feed you, and they did.
They will.
The food was better in these encampments we see lying around our sidewalks in Denver.
Right.
Really? I didn't notice Gordon Ramsay among any of the homeless.
Yeah,
why is that?
I remember first day at an encampment, we're talking to somebody at an encampment. This one was 11th and Broadway. And I said, well, how do you get food? And he gave me this, this blank stare. He said, well, there's a 7-Eleven a couple of blocks down. And I said, well, do you have to panhandle and raise the money to buy food? And he goes, no, people bring us food. And at first, I thought that was so bizarre. I didn't really believe him. And then, wow, it was really true. I saw people
bring me food.
People bring food. Restaurants bring donated meals. Individuals bring food out. I remember my last night, Friday night, would have been January 1st, over at the encampment, which is just really across the street from Fox 31 studios in the vicinity of Lincoln and Spear. And so it's just getting dark, and a car rolls up, 2 women in it, and one goes, is anybody hungry? I've got some hot chicken noodle soup. And so I said, sure. So I go over, and she gives me this really nice container, styrofoam container, full of just the most amazing hot chicken noodle soup, homemade chicken noodle soup. And then, and for dessert, she gives me tinfoil.
Dessert?
Banana nut bread, homemade banana nut bread, amazing. So I finished that. 30 minutes later, another car pulls up. anybody hungry? This is not good for weight control. So I raised my, sure. And so she gives me, a man and woman, gives me a big Tupperware container of the most amazing homemade stew with a roll, with cupcakes for dessert, a bottle of water, and asks me if I want a blanket. I mean, this is just nonstop. And so I think these people are really well-meaning, but at the end of the day, what they're doing is enabling some very destructive behavior, I think, for these young people.
Okay, so I've always said the failure in Denver, particularly under Hickenlooper, where he was going to end all this in 10 years, when that was 15, 17 years ago, he said it, is that whatever you subsidize, you're going to get more of. Mm-hmm. And Denver went around to subsidize the homeless. I remember our late friend Bob Cote with Step Denver, it was called Step 13 back then, and he was so insistent, no, you never give them money. Right. No, you never give them food, because then they'll never get their lives together. And I think about these nice people who are feeding you. They're only making it worse. They're only making it easier to live out this life. You know,
there are some great programs out there. I think the Denver Rescue Mission has some a program that they would pitch at mealtime. That's I think it's something 9 to 11 months long. It's work centric. You have to be sober. They certainly help you in terms of substance abuse treatment. They provide mental health care, all the things, but the goal is to teach you personal responsibility, work skills, and then where you get a job, where you can have stable housing and be able to pay for it. Step Denver, former Step 13, has a great program where they take people that have substance abuse problems, that are chronically homeless, that want to change, and help them change. In Aurora, we have it's actually a Boulder-based nonprofit called Ready to Work, and we have that program in the city of Aurora that is very effective, that also requires folks to change that want to change.
It still just blows my mind that, you had to blow away your weight program so that you could, so you get cupcakes and banana bread. It is, and it's so counterintuitive that if you want to help these people, you have to stop enabling the behavior. And it's why Denver is, the more they spend on homeless services, surprise, the more homeless they get. Parting thought on this one. I know you went through a big hippie phase
I was 14 in 1969. Fortunately, I did not participate in that.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I could see you with a tie-dye and grooving to Jerry Garcia. That lifestyle seems really uncomfortable and dirty. I mean, I look at the camps around here, and they're filthy, and it's not just bad for the people who are in them, but the filth is and the excrement and the needles and the trash. It's destroying our city. It didn't look fun to live in that.
No, it's surprising that.
Were you worried for any health issues?
Well, I was obviously very concerned. In fact, let's just say I slept on the edge of the encampment and not in the middle of the encampment. But I think that there was a real concern when I first looked at the encampment and decided on that particular encampment that it seemed to be a little bit better organized than it was. But by the end of the week, it looked pretty bad. But where the tents were spaced out a little bit more, and it seemed a little cleaner, and that's why I was attracted to it. But oddly enough, they have a social structure in these better organized encampments, the larger ones, where they have their own kind of informal leadership, but that leadership, you have to, in fact, get permission to stay there.
Really?
And I had to get permission to stay there. But they're leery of outsiders for two reasons. One is because of the drug use, and there's some allegations of other criminal activity that goes on there. And I had circumstantial evidence of certain things going on there, like bicycle theft, but no hard evidence. I didn't see anybody steal a bike. But drug use, certainly saw a lot of drug use in terms of folks injecting, the people there injecting crystal methamphetamine as well as smoking in these clear glass pipes. And so they're very paranoid about anybody who appears to be from the outside at all. And then also they're not crazy about outsiders simply because of the fact that they don't want to grow. The more they grow, the higher they feel their profile is in terms of being swept.
And they don't want the health department come and clean. Real fast as you can. After this week, after seeing it up close, now understanding the differences, which I really wasn't even aware of the different subcultures, how do you stop the encampments? If you could, let's not worry about those people who are in the encampments or those who are trying to find jobs, but those who want the hippie lifestyle of dropping out of society. What would you do to get rid of it?
First of all,
and by the way, I just want to get rid of it. I've hit a boiling point.
Yeah, people, the so-called advocates will look at CDC guidelines and they will say, look, it says you can't move them during the pandemic. However, if they read further down, it says there are two caveats that you can move them under even during the pandemic. One is if it's a public safety threat and a public health threat. They're clearly both. And the fact that Denver, because of the fact that they have a camping ban in place, and in order to survive a court challenge on a camping ban, you have to have adequate shelter capacity for these people that are in these encampments, and Denver does. So it certainly exists.
So Denver could arrest these people, force them into shelters if they so choose, or to move along.
Well, they certainly have been. They have been sweeping them. But they pop up again, and so it's I guess you could debate whether or not they could do it faster. But the fact is, I mean, there's always legal challenges on behalf of the encampments coming forward that Denver has to argue in court. And so I have to think that they're probably doing the best they can in getting the larger ones swept.
So your policy recommendation would be?
Sweep them.
Sweep them.
Sweep them. There is no place for them, certainly in anywhere. I think particularly when you have other alternatives. And the fact is, I think we do have to recognize that we have people that if this is the lifestyle they're afforded and they're able to support themselves by what other means, whether it's panhandling or criminal activity or support from the public, they're going to do that, and they're not going to change, and you're going to get more of it.
Thank you for doing it. I think it was really incredible. Next time you have a vacation, you could just become a deadhead and travel with the band or something like that.
I'm not doing this again. Let me tell you, it was physically very hard, very cold. I had no money. I had no food. Food was not a problem. Money was, in the sense that I could never take a bus anywhere. So literally walked all the way into Aurora, in eastern part of Aurora, back into Denver with a backpack on. I mean, I did an awful lot of walking.
Well, yeah, maybe if you got a pay raise, you could actually go on a vacation. We got to run.
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.